Here we are, Emily. Please go ahead.
Oh, okay. Welcome everyone to this workshop. So very happy to be here. Um, I, my name is Emily Sims. I'm a senior specialist at the International Labor Organization, and I have the honor of moderating this panel. ILO recognizes the critical role that zones play in economic and social development, with their close relationships to government and business and their position as economic drivers. Zones are uniquely positioned to connect labor policy with practice and promote decent work. They also provide opportunities to foster positive spillovers, technology, skills, good management practices, capital, for broader economic and social development at the local level. Furthermore, by championing good labor practices, zones can attract MNEs that are increasingly concerned with ethical supply chains and better attract and retain a capable workforce. ILO also supports governments to improve decent work outcomes in the broader investment policy framework influencing company operations. This includes providing advice and technical support regarding trade and investment agreements. An example is the SADC model BIT, which references minimum standards for human rights, environment, and labor, and specifically mentions ILO normative instruments. ILO's approach to supporting government policymakers in investment promotion includes action to facilitate home host country dialogues, to provide more in-depth technical assistance at country level, to guide companies operating in global supply chains to address labor issues and support suppliers such as SMEs and women-owned enterprises, and to promote international policy coherence across intergovernmental agencies, promoting responsible trade and sustainable and responsible enterprises. For example, ILO is currently implementing a European Union funded project on trade for decent work in Mozambique. The project aims to support labor relations and working conditions in line with sustainable development goals, including promotion of decent work in the extractive sector. Special economic zones and investment promotion agencies have a central role to play in sustainable development. SDG 17 recognizes the importance of the private sector, and the Addis Ababa Action Agenda affirms that FDI is essential to build back better in sectors such as renewable energy, new forms of transport and mobility, and local investment in basic infrastructure. The income security, job opportunities, and workforce development created through investment in economic, social, and environmental recovery measures can, if correctly directed, also underpin diversification and economic inclusion. Consequently, I am really excited to be moderating this panel. We have an exciting set of speakers whose complementary knowledge and experience will provide us a rich and diverse set of perspectives. After they speak, we will open the floor to questions and comments. Please feel free to type your question or comment in the chat box, which I will be monitoring. Our introductory remarks will be given by Mr. Ahmed Benes, the Secretary General of AEZO. Mr. Benes, I turn the floor over to you now.
Thank you very much, Emily, and thanks all for joining this webinar session. I'm very pleased to be here with you in the opening of this regional workshop. Unfortunately, we cannot be together in person, but let's use the best of this technology to exchange our views and experiences on such important topics. But first, kindly allow me to express my thanks to Mr. Gregor and to my friend, Mr. Gregor Binkert and his colleague for hosting this AEZO workshop under the theme Special Economic Zones, Drivers for Economic Growth and Sustainable Industrializations, and having the Mozambican experience as the flagship for this workshop. I would like also to give special kudos to the organization team for bringing together such fine group of experts from Unido, UNCTAD, the International Labor Organization, the Investment and Export Promotion Agency of Mozambique, as well as the representative of the investors and business community of Beluluane Industrial Park. So for the one who don't know our organization, we are the representative of the African Economic Zones community. We are connecting more than 82 members representing 42 African countries today. And there are actually more than 189 operating economic zones across the continent, and more than 50 projects have been announced for completions. But since its inception, the African SEZ have given a significant boost to support FDI flows, creating an attractive investment conditions, and of course, supporting job creation. Over the past 5 years, 60 million jobs have been created in agro-processing, industrial manufacturing, services, and nowadays, the special economic zones are considered to be the trigger of policy reforms and the testing ground of the introduction of new business models and value-added activities. They have successfully led to export diversification, promoting regional trade and stimulating the industrial spillover effects and clustering. They are also one of the main devices to advance the objective of the Continental Free Trade Agreement in attracting more investment, driving trade liberalization, regional integration and cooperations, and also implementing regulations that promote gender equality, capacity building, training facilities, and others. And it is with this view that the special economic zones are to be considered as a strategic instrument to achieve economic growth and sustainable industrializations. So they are involved today in the implementation of new industrial policies, leading to rebalancing import and export activities toward growth on serving the domestic market and as well as the regional demand. So they play a critical role in accelerating industrialization, diversifying the value-added export, and ultimately building a sustainable economic model. And the Mozambican SEZ program, which has to date designated several SEZ in the country, in the province of Maputo, Nampula, Zambezia, Sofala, it continues to make a meaningful contribution to the regional economy. And the potential of the Mozambican SEZ has been nurtured by easing and streamlining its provision and setting up strategic partnership and multi-sectors activities. Moreover, there are some basic steps that can be taken into consideration in order to ensure a sustainable economic growth and linking the SEZ performance with the local economy. So first, the SEZ could invest in promoting inclusive and sustainable industrial development to effectively address major challenges in terms of job creation, energy efficiency, sustainable development, capacity building, innovation, and social inclusion. Second, the SEZ could bring a transformational change to the country by attracting, of course, quality FDI, rather in agro-processing, light manufacturing, the metal industry, the automotive sector. And this could help in creating the industrial upgrading and the productive and dynamic local private sector. Third, it's also our duty to develop policies and procedures that support the deployment of new technologies, digitization, innovation, with recognition of the importance of the industrial diversifications. Last but not least, the regional trade and integration should also foster the SEZ business value propositions, so the investors and the industrialists would certainly be encouraged by a greater regional integrations that would offer a larger nearby market and the greater sourcing opportunities. So this regional workshop is definitely an opportunity to share ideas on what should and what must be done to disseminate the importance of the economic growth, sustainable industrializations, collaborative thinking, and close cooperations. Through effort, resources, talents, knowledge sharing, we can affect change in accomplishing and developing regional value chain, as well as supporting the vision of creating one African market and the Continental Free Trade Agreement. So for Beluluane Industrial Park, the Mozambican SEZ, and all African economic zones, this is a window of time. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much, and I wish you a pleasant and informative workshop and a successful deliberation for this regional workshop. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Dennis. And that's a lovely transition to our next speaker, Mr. Greg Blinkert, the member of the Board of Directors of BIP Mozambique. Mr. Blinkert, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Emily. And I would like to thank also Mr. Ahmed Benis and of course AEZO as an organization and for chairing that organization. We are benefiting from the networking that you're building and from all the knowledge exchange throughout the year, and of course for organizing also today's event. So thank you very much. And you have just made a very, very eloquent case for the benefits of special economic zones. So I can be brief. I was going to say some similar things, but you've expressed it even more eloquently. I fully subscribe to your views, of course. I used to work for the World Bank for over 18 years, and I left in 2016. Even at the World Bank, I was already strongly in favor of the clustering effects of special economic zones, that this is necessary to get industrialization going. It is very important. And there were different schools within the World Bank, as I'm sure some people experience when they try to get World Bank projects. Some say, oh no, just improve the overall investment climate, where the other school says, no, you need the clustering effect, which is very important. It's not just tax incentives, but the clustering effect in order to get technology, innovation, all these kind of things going. So I joined the private sector in 2016. By 2017, I joined an investor group, Swiss Mozambican investor group, when we invested in the Beluluane Industrial Park, which is and so now I'm on the board, and it's a public-private partnership together with APIEX, representing the government, and we have Madam Carmen Ezequiel here, who will talk more about the role of APIEX. So in addition to being the supervisory body in the country and so on, they also are a shareholder in the Beluluane Industrial Park. But maybe I just want, and I'm really very happy about today's workshop, the combination of people you put together. On one hand, sort of the normative part, the international normative part, which is ILO, UNCTAD, Unido. That's very good, together with the hands-on experience from policymakers like APIEX, or of course, Mr. Honorio Manuel, the manager of the Beluluane Industrial Park, sort of to mix the normative and the practical on the ground people. So that's excellent. Maybe just sort of short 3 points on the context for all this industrial policy. One thing which is also very important in Mozambique, and we benefit quite a bit from in the Beluluane Industrial Park, which so far is the one that works best, which is the SADC, the Southern African Development Community, so the regional trade agreement. This has been very instrumental that companies based in the Mozambique can export to South Africa, to Zambia, to Zimbabwe, to all the neighboring countries, and it's a well-functioning regional trade agreement, and that this has been very important. And of course, now we're looking forward to the benefits of the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, that we have further benefits. So we can also then export to countries outside of the SADC zone. Of course, Beluluane is not just exporting to the neighboring countries. Many countries, for example, we have a steel company, but they started to export to South Africa, steel pipes, high quality steel pipes, and now they can export to the United States, they can export to various countries. So that home market or regional home market was an important advantage. A second point I would like to make, of course, is also in the case of Mozambique, as everybody is aware, there were these huge discoveries of gas in the north of the country. Previously, sort of 20 years ago, there was this big discoveries of coal reserves in the center of the country. So you have all these extractives. There's a lot of boom. At the same time, the challenge of providing local content, developing skills, really benefiting the communities around it is a challenge that all the countries face, of course, that have strong extractive sectors. And in Mozambique, it's new. We all are aware, the media report a lot about the problem of insecurity in the north of the country. And well, it's a complex situation, but it can only be addressed if there is also socioeconomic development. This will be very, very important. And that these large projects, those mega projects really benefit the the local population, the local economy, beyond the province. And so one of the objectives, of course, is also to do special economic zones in that area of the country, near those projects, to really increase the multiplier effect and the linkages. And we're working on that as well. In addition to doing the Beluluane Industrial Park, we have also other projects to expand around mining areas, to do special economic zones, again, to increase local content, to increase skill development, to have a positive effect on the communities. There's a number of challenges we need to look at, some administrative rules, some tax rules that may have to be adjusted, but we were working on that. But we are very strong believers that it's possible to increase those linkage effects. So I would like to stop here because we have many more speakers who have a lot to share. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Winkert. Very interesting observations. Our next speaker is Mr. Honorio Manuel, the General Director of BIP Mozambique. And Mr. Manuel will provide us a summary of the performance of the zone and perspectives for BIP and the opportunities that the pandemic, as terrible as it has been, has brought for the Mozambican government to realize the potential of industrial parks and zones. Mr. Manuel, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Bom dia a todos. Good morning, everyone. First of all, I'd like to thank AEZO for letting us host such important event as Mozambique, but as well as Beluluane Industrial Park. Like Mr. Gregor said, I will give an overview of Beluluane Industrial Park, what we have achieved since our creation, as well as our perspective. And I hope that everyone can see my screen.
Yes, we do.
Thank you very much. So Beluluane Industrial Park, it's a PPP between the government of Mozambique and private sector. Are coming from 17 different countries, and we are a multi-sectorial industrial park. The anchor of this park is the aluminium smelter called Mozambique Aluminium. It's actually the second biggest aluminium smelter in Africa. And from that aluminium smelter, we have some downstream activities. We have also steel, we have construction material such as cement, we have steel, tires, and many, many other activities. This shows that Beluluane Industrial Park, it's a multi-sectoral, it can host any kind of activity. From 2000 up to now, we have been able to get 6,500 employees for these 42 companies. I will be sharing quickly some aerial pictures of Beluluane Industrial Park. As you can see there, these are the pictures of our current development in the park. This is a very nice picture showing the night scenario. This is another picture of our development. This is another one. So this is our development. When we were created, 700 hectares of land has been granted to this project. Since 2000, we developed 300 hectares. And since last year, in 2020, we started the development of phase 2. The phase 2 comprised 10 years from 2020 to 2030, which means that within 10 years, we intend to develop the remaining 400 hectares of land. And for that, we think that we'll be bringing more than 200 companies and create more than 50,000 jobs in addition to the 6,500 jobs that we currently have. So one of the most important things that I would like to consider in this slide is the green belt that shows our responsibility in terms of environment issues. The green belt that is all around the Beluluane Industrial Park, which actually separates the industrial activities and community. As you can see, the blue line there. We also develop some action under our social responsibility. One of the big action that we do here is called Mimi Niko Kazi. Before it used to be called Joba, which we did 2 years from 2018 to 2020. That included around 500 interns that got opportunity within Beluluane Industrial Park, where we use normally to take interns and allocate in a very different campus during 6 months, give them soft skill trainings, and pay them as 7,000 Metcash per month in a way that they can be ready to do this internship program. Therefore, this was being funded by the UK government, and from 2021, this year, this program will be funded by the Germans. And we have changed the name. Now it's going to be called Mimi Niko Kazi, which means I am at work. It's actually Swahili. So this program, it's going to be nationwide. We hope that it covers all the province of Mozambique, specifically for the province that we will be expanding our Beluluane Industrial Park. One of the most important things that I have to highlight in this project is that we always try to bring women specifically for those areas that people don't really see women, like industrial areas, welders, boiler makers, and others. We have been successfully able to do that. More than 35% of the interns were women in that first phase of the project. So we want to continue to promote the gender inclusion in the industrial area. So our expansion approach, we want to expand for nationwide. One of the things we are doing, we will always be establishing our industrial park wherever there is a huge project, which means that our expansion plan is based on the demand driven. Like, for example, what happens in our current development, we have been able to do all this success in these 21 years because we have Mozal, the aluminum smelter. So we will be expanding in Nampula, for example, where we have Kenmar, they have a sand project. We will be expanding to Palma, where we have the oil and gas project, and other locations as long as there's an anchor. It's very important to highlight that because in the initial phase, the park needs to have this huge project. Although along the time, the park becomes more independent. If you look Beluluane Industrial Park today, we are quite balanced, which means that more than 50% of the companies that are within the park, they don't only supply Mozal, they also supply the country and also export. But initially, if you go back to 2000, 2001, 2002, 100% of the companies based in the park were only Mozal service provider. This shows how it's important to have an anchor just to boost your development. So that's our expansion approach for the future. BIP would like also to continue developing this approach of PPP because there's a very good coordination between the government and private investors. So whenever we will be expanding, we would really like to keep this approach of going with the government. We also want to support local content. This is very, very important to develop the local content, make sure that the small and medium companies can benefit from the industrial parks, make sure that local communities get jobs, get internship programs. That's also a very important approach that Beluluane Industrial Park would like to carry on. Agro-processing, it's one of the areas that we want to make sure that that happens, entrepreneurship, development, and conservation area. As I showed in our map, we have that green belt. That's also a lesson learned that we would like to carry on in our further development to make sure that industrial activities are separated with communities and so on. BIP, Beluluane Industrial Park, is also very close to donors, as I gave 2 examples. From 2018 to 2020, we worked with the UK government, and from 2021, this year, we are working with the German government. So we are very close to donor in these kind of projects. So we would like to carry that approach. We want to create impact and sustainability in wherever we go. One lesson we learned with COVID is that it's very important that the special economic zones or industrial park in general can really try to develop their own value chain. They have to develop their own solution in their countries. For example, when we had COVID, some of the things that used to be imported, we had some requests from companies saying, Beluluane National Park, what can be done from this park in a way that we don't have an option now because the borders are closed. And actually we developed other equipment based here in the park after COVID. So one lesson learned is that countries should take this opportunity, especially industrial park should take this opportunity to develop their own value chain within their countries. So thank you very much for your time. And I'm still open for any question that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Manuel. Our next speaker is Mr. Anthony Miller, focal point for corporate sustainability and responsible investment at UNCTAD. Mr. Miller will speak about the role of zones in promoting sustainable development and sustainable business practices. Mr. Miller, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Emily, and thank you to AEZO for the invitation to be here and for organizing such a high-quality event and very interesting discussion. Just to echo previous speakers, I'm very much appreciating just being a participant in this discussion to hear these presentations. Today, I want to talk a little bit about sustainability as a service in thinking about the functions of zones. We heard from the Secretary General of AEZO about sustainable industrialization as a key priority. And we've also heard just from our previous speaker, excellent presentation, where he was explaining that impact and sustainability are core values for their zone and showed us some examples where they're putting those words into action. I want to talk a little bit about a study that we did where we looked at 100 zones around the world and examined their practices around sustainability, environmental and social issues, that we can start to understand these things as a service provided to the companies that are in the zone as a way to attract more investment in the zone. We know from speaking with many companies in the zones, I think many people on this call are familiar with this, that one of the primary reasons why companies locate to a zone is simply, in a short phrase, they will often say, because things work. Everything works. You know, they've got good infrastructure, they've got good services. It's a service package that's provided to companies in the zone. And that's why they like to locate there. There might be other incentives, fiscal incentives and so on, but the key thing that they're after there is that level of quality of service so that they can focus on their business and not be distracted by other issues. We also heard from a previous speaker about this clustering effect. Gregor mentioned this, and that is a key issue, clustering in industrialization. But it's also a key thing when it comes to sustainability, because if you want to provide, a lot of sustainability issues require a certain amount of infrastructure and personnel and investment. And if you have this clustering of companies in a zone, you can take advantage of economies of scale, economies of scope, of having everybody in one geographic location where you can focus on various features of sustainability. So this is what we looked at in our study, a number of labor-related features, environmental health-related features. These are things that zones are already engaged in. So you can see that more than about half of all the zones that we looked at around the world have already got some sort of public policy on labor practices and some sort of policy on environmental practices. So these things are not new. And again, we just heard from our previous speaker, excellent emphasis on these factors and examples of what they're doing there. It may not have rolled out to all zones, but certainly this is something that zones should be aware of, that this is now increasingly mainstream practice among zones, and it's something they need to focus on. If you look at, again, about a quarter of zones have a number of other features that they're offering, whether that's medical services, firefighting, environmental services. Again, these are things that require some investment, and there are economies of scale and scope. Every individual factory has to have their own firefighting service. That's a cost. If just the zone has one, now you're providing something, a service that investors in the zone can benefit from. And that's true for environmental services, whether it's waste treatment, recycling services, also the energy for the zone, the electricity that's provided for the zone. If you've got sustainable energy provided for the zone, that becomes a point of attraction for investors. All of the companies operating in the zone can communicate that to their own consumers and investors that they're using renewable energy, but they're getting this from the zone as a service. We also took note of minimum wage differential. There was some conversation about that earlier. I think maybe that was in the pre-session before the formal session started, but Gregor, we were talking about that. And yes, we do notice that sometimes in zones, the minimum wage is different. In many cases, it's unclear exactly how it's different, but in those cases where it is clear, it's almost always greater than the minimum wage nationally. And this is another case where zones can be a model, a zone for investment, is by becoming a model zone for employment and being a first choice employer for workers around the country, and an image or a model for employers outside the zone to emulate. So again, these are all the factors that we looked at. Many of these things are increasingly mainstream, and as we saw in the previous presentation, they're integrated into the daily operations and the real mission of the zone, to attract investors to the zone, to provide them a quality of service that incorporates all of the social environmental factors that affect the company as well. We sort of distilled this into a general framework. I'm not going to go through all of these bullet points, but I just want to highlight these three columns here. You know, you've got a column on policies and standards, and that is really what sets your direction. What is your North Star here? You know, we heard earlier again that impact and sustainability are the core values of the zone. That already starts to set the direction of the zone. It allows them to delineate specific policies, whether they're in the areas of labor, environment, health and safety, and so on. Then you see the other two columns around infrastructure assistance, administrative assistance. Again, this is where you start to look at the activities of the zones as a service. What can the zone provide? All of these things, and many zones may provide these and not be conscious of what they're providing. They need to become very self-conscious about this and articulate this to potential investors to say, this is what we provide you. We're going to ensure that you have a very high quality environment in which you operate. Keep in mind that many investors will look at the way social environmental factors are managed as a general proxy for the quality of management of the zone overall. So if you cannot manage these things, they're going to wonder what else can you not manage. So, and if you can manage these things, they're going to have tremendous confidence on on everything else you can manage around the zone. So it's key to focus on the types of infrastructures, to become aware of these things, to inventory, if you're operating a zone now, to inventory the services that you're already providing, and using this framework to try to identify gaps, areas where you could provide additional services. I want to emphasize that, you know, UNCTAD, we did this study. We did it on our own, but around the same time that we published this, the World Free Zone Organization had published independently their own report about free zones of the future. And in that report, they also heavily emphasize sustainability as a service. So this is clearly a trend in the industry worldwide. And if you haven't integrated it into your own zone already, we encourage you to do so. And I look forward to participating in the conversation with the rest of the participants about this topic today. Thank you very much, Emily.
You're on mute, Emily. Emily, you.
Thank you so much, Anthony. Our next speaker is Mr. Jaime Komiche, Unido Country Director for Mozambique. Mr. Komiche will speak about Unido's international framework for eco-industrial parks and related initiatives, including government guidelines for attracting investment during the pandemic. And he'll also highlight strategic issues regarding Mozambique's investment plans to stimulate the country's economic growth. Mr. Komiche, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Emily. I'll share the screen in order to support my remarks, but I'll not be exhaustive. I believe the handouts will be available, and we have also a link with the guidelines for industrial parks, Unido guidelines for industrial parks that the participants can benefit from and download. So,
excuse me, Mr. Komiche, could I suggest you put it in slideshow mode so we can see the slide?
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, now it's better. Okay. So thank you once more for having me. My thanks go to the AEZO and also to the BIP for hosting the event, and to everybody else who is attending and supporting this event. Since the time is very limited, I'll start just by focusing on the key messages that will support our pitch. With respect to Unido international guidelines for industrial parks, as I mentioned, then they can be further analyzed by downloading the document, but is a comprehensive reference framework to guide the development of competitive, inclusive, and sustainable parks. They can also be regarded as a reference tool by the different stakeholders, including industrial park regulators, developers, operators, tenants, partners, and financial institutions. It's important to highlight that to develop industrial parks should be a shared effort, and all the stakeholders have to be on the same page in order to maximize synergies. The guidelines, as I mentioned, they are free of charge and can be downloaded. With respect to the international framework for eco-industrial parks, it's interesting that UNCTAD has already highlighted through the notion that the special economic zones can be considered as a service, and that way become a hub of opportunity for other tenants who want to join in conditions of compliance, in conditions of competitiveness. I will go further and say that it can also be an instrument of strategy, particularly in countries willing to relaunch its respective industrial strategies or industrial policies. In the case of Mozambique, there is an industrial policy and strategy 2016-2025 that is being affected by issues of funding, of investment to advance the strategy, issues of human capital, and also challenges in terms of access to technology, etc. And definitely an industrial park, and in the case of Mozambique, a good example of an industrial park can be an opportunity to strategically advance and test the best practices and the good intentions of industrial policy. Special economic zones are called and are so-called highlands of excellence, precisely because they offer a package of services and competences that in most of the LDCs are not available elsewhere, only in those clusters or those islands of activity. But they quite often they come with a undesired spillovers of inequality, environmental degradation, and other challenges. And it was also highlighted in the survey done by UNCTAD that there are a number of issues. I mean, most of the interesting issues are still in the, I would say, the scope of the 25% of adherence of compliance. And so there's a lot to be done. And the International Framework for Eco-Industrial Parks is also an opportunity to bring together all these practices, both social, environmental, and beyond, and bring them together into to the mainstream and become a common practice in special economic zones. And we expect that both by the good intentions that are already being outlined by the Beluluane Industrial Park, and by adhering to best practices such as the ones provided by Unido guidelines, and now through this coalition of the willing towards more sustainable and ecologically friendly industrial parks, I believe we can make a very important step forward. In terms of support, supporting initiatives for development of special economic zones, industrial parks, we could say that since the COVID pandemic started, there's not much to report because we were going through a very critical period of learning and reckoning and trying to make sense on how to move forward. But what I can say is that Unido has been busy from the onset trying to analyze the impacts of COVID-19 in the industrial sector. And we deployed the first survey last year. And now there is an update to that survey that also resulted in a report. And we expect that recommendations and lessons learned from the feedback will help to inform a proper strategy, not only for sustainable industrial development, but also to inform or to reframe our support to industrial parks and special economic zones. And one lesson that we are learning from the COVID and through the survey is that governments in general have shown very severe limitations to support the private sector to cope with the pandemic, as most of the funding had to be channeled for social protection and other critical areas. And that this can somehow be critical in terms of the capacity of governments moving forward to support the deployment of a sound industrial policy and all the necessary adjustments to cope with the COVID-19 in the industrial sector, in the manufacturing sector. So we regard PPPs and business linkages as increasingly pertinent remedies in order to balance and cope with the limitations that government may find in terms of support and funding. In terms of guidelines for government, I would like to highlight that governments, they have their sovereignty, they have their own priorities, and the guidelines are just that, are recommendations, but we cannot go beyond making informed suggestions and impose our will, as good that good intentions might be, or associated to lessons coming from best practice elsewhere. What we have to do is to keep the tone, keep the advocacy, and the fact that there are more stakeholders coming together and converging in terms of messages. I saw the messages from the previous speakers, and we seem to be converging in terms of the intentions and the acknowledgement that the times have changed and the practice have to change too. So this can be a way to exert pressure in the good sense and awareness to government adjust the strategies. And I would highlight that in this case, the Beluluane Industrial Park Special Economic Zone should become the national testing ground for industrial policy reform, including improvements to the business environment. Because throughout these 21 years of Beluluane Industrial Park, if we would make a comparison of what is happening in the business environment of the country at large and the BIP, if the BIP was a country in itself, I'm quite sure that in the doing business ranking would feature in a very, very good position vis-a-vis the country position. So while going elsewhere to learn lessons that can be learned just next door or very close to where we are. In terms of guidelines for Beluluane Industrial Park and free trade zone managers, there's not much to say given that they are already pressing the right buttons, but we should emphasize that special economic zones, as mentioned by ACTA, should become catalytic for the achievement of or the acceleration of the SDGs. In this particular case, we highlight the SDG 9 that tackles industrialization, infrastructure, and innovation. I think we can find a combination of all these three aspects within the special economic zones and in the particular case of Mozambique in Beluluane, and this can produce ripple effects and positive spillovers to other regions, as also mentioned, to Nampula, to Cabo Delgado, and trigger the starting of new special economic zones that from the onset are deemed to be winners because they are demand driven rather than just wishful thinking without the proper planning and support. So the BIP Special Economic Zone, similar to its global peers, must adjust its value proposition with regards to gender equity, labor, and environmental sustainability. And I believe they are on the right track, and we stand ready to cooperate and enhance this effort through our normative role. Just coming to the end, looking at Mozambique investment plans to stimulate country's economic growth, I would mention essentially that again we should look at the best practices that are already in place through the PPP for the Beluluane Economic Zone and use them because they have the potential to become a magnet of know-how, technology transfer, normative support to inform the industrial policy. So rather than reinventing the wheel, I think industrial policy managers and decision makers should look more seriously to all the different aspects of the dynamics of the Beluluane Industrial Park and see how to replicate, how to upscale in different settings, not necessarily in special economic zones, but in other industrial areas of the country. And finally, I would say that a common problem that special economic zones are facing worldwide is still related to lack of integration within the local economy. And I think it's possible, even beyond the replication of the special economic zone, is possible to create opportunities for business linkages and knowledge sharing beyond the restricted scope of the special economic zone. And we have an experience through the subcontracting partnership exchange that is a Unido program which supports larger companies normally within special economic zones to find suppliers and reducing the local need for importing inputs. And we can very much build on that to support the expansion of the Beluluane economic zone, together with our approach to industrial parks and the initiative and our participation in the initiative for the eco-industrial park. So we stand ready to do all the support from the normative policy and advocacy and the technical cooperation required for the special economic zone of Beluluane to continue being a winner and expand its spillovers and its benefits to the whole country. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Komiche. Our final speaker is Ms. Carmen Ezequiel, who is coordinator of the Division for the Creation and Development of Special Economic Zones in Mozambique for the Agency for the Promotion of Investment and Exports. Ms. Ezequiel will provide us with an overview of special economic zones, the history, contribution to economic growth in Mozambique, job creation, failures, challenges, lessons, and future of SEZs in Mozambique. Ms. Ezequiel, the floor is yours.
It's quite good being the last one, but please, Emily, can you tell me what time I still have?
We are a little bit over with the last intervention, but that's okay. I don't think we have so many questions. So if you could try and keep it to 10 minutes, I think we'll be all right in your intervention. Yes. So please don't cut it short because of the time. Again, could you expand the slides?
Yes, yes, of course.
Yes.
Being quite taking time, but it's on processing. I don't know if you're able to see.
Yes. There it is. Perfect.
Yeah. Thank you. My name is Carmen Ezequiel from APIEX. I'm going to talk about special economic zones, the contextualization, about where we're coming from, the contribution, and some lessons and challenge that we have on our special economic zones. On 1993, the government we have the investment law approved and was defining the concept of special economic zones. In 1999 was creating the first industrial park, which is the Beluluane Industrial Park here, and the industrial free zones. On 27 was a visit to Republic of China, where the senior staff of Mozambique went to China to start the model. And at the same year, we started with our first special economic zone, which is Nacala. We have now currently around 6 special economic zones and 5 industrial free zones. We here divide the special economic zones and the industrial free zones, but not so different. And we have also 15 or 13 isolated free zones, which is 3 points for the regime. And on those, only 3 special economic zones are operational, which is Nacala, Manga, Mongasa, and Mukuba, and the Beluluane Industrial Park, which is also operational. For the contribution, we have the increase in the current flow of national and foreign direct investment, the generation of new jobs, promoting the technological development and the industrialization. And we also increase exports for the national products and increase the tax revenue. And the results of those achievements by the creation and implementation of industrial free zones and special economic zones, showing an encouraging picture and the positive impact on the attracting of new structural investments. We have improved from 2009 to 2020 around 218 projects, and in total amount of around 3,500 million. In terms of job creation, we are talking about around 40,000 new jobs. The challenge can you imagine when we are talking about special economic zones, what the industrial park was talking about with the fellows and the finalists that was here before? The infrastructure, when we talk about roads, water supply, energy, telecommunication, is one of the most important when we talk about special economic zones. And we have many challenges on this. And obviously the management infrastructure, the investment continues to improve on the business environment, but we need more flexibility on managing and mainly on decision-making process, which is one of our big challenge. And for some special economic zones that they are not still operational, we still need those feasibility study and make the special economic zones as a project and as planning more feasible or more bankable. We still need to attract more investment for managing, operating, and develop those zones. So I think that I could be managing the time that I had, but I can explain a little more in terms of what is our future. Was a question related to the LNG projects, and we are thinking to have more special economic zones in Afungi, which will be one of another challenge, because when it comes to mineral gas and mineral resources, themselves has their own attracting. So having more specialism to that area is something that we have in the plan, but we still discuss the importance and how we are going to have those increasing, establishing special zones in Afungi. So thank you. You are muted. Can you unmute yourself, Mimi?
Thank you. Yes, thank you so much. I'm typing key points that each of the speakers have been making for the summary at the end. So that's why I didn't want to disturb you with clicking in the background. Okay, so that closes our presentations. Thank you so much, Ms. Ezekiel, for highlighting the development and challenges in the Mozambique zones more generally across the country. Let's move now to some of the questions that have been typed in. So first of all, several people have asked about the slides and the presentations. Please check back at the AEZO website where Farah will very kindly post the materials from today. So you'll be able to check back on those. Some of the other questions that people have asked, first, there's a question on specific interventions. This is coming from Rebecca Nalumu, excuse me, on what specific interventions are you doing to increase local content? I think that would maybe most appropriately be covered in the first instance by Ms. Ezekiel for zones in general, and then perhaps move to Mr. Manuel about specific strategies that are applied in the Beluluane park. So Ms. Ezekiel, would you like to answer that one? Does the government of Mozambique have a specific strategy for promoting increased local content?
Yes, we have. When we talk about special economic zones, for sometimes we are thinking by exporting all like final product. But different of industrial free zones, on special economic zones, the product could be sold locally. And we have that exchanging and the linkage between the projects. And for example, for Nakala, we have in Nakala combined two districts, which is Nakala Avelia and the Nakala Port District. The zone was established within the city, and we have there all the population which was there before the zone. And they are quite, when we see before the establishment, we could see that the people from now, or from that time to now, they have increased a lot their own life, even the context that was done by them, which we have in Nakala, the national direct investment, it's more than the foreign. So it's one of the issues regarding to the local content.
Okay. And how about you, Mr. Manuel? Would you like to give us a sense of the strategy you specifically employ in the park, BIP, that are facilitating more local content?
Thank you, Emil. This is a very key question for this discussion. Specifically, as Beluluane Industrial Park, we even created what we call SME Village. It's a kind of a space where we supply the basic infrastructures to make sure that the SME can enjoy those infrastructures. Because if you look at the problems that the SMEs, local SMEs have, are related to their capacity to develop, let's say, infrastructures, to do buildings, to finance themselves, and all these issues. So what we did as Beluluane Industrial Park is to create within our park an area where we create these kind of basic infrastructures in a way that we can accommodate with a very reasonable condition these SMEs. But in general, what has been done or what's being done by the government, there's a law which is called Local Content Law. It has been discussed many times, and we hope that this law can be approved within this year, that will actually regulate the local companies specifically for the big project. Because as of now, it's still not very much clear what is defined and what are the guidelines for this local content. So we are very much concerned. Just to give you one more example, the industrial park that we will be creating in Nampula, MoMA, for the heavy sand project, it intends actually to boost the participation of the local SMEs. Because you see, the big projects, the Kenmar ones, whenever they try to source from the local market, they find the price not competitive, because for them, as they are a free zone project, when they import their goods from somewhere, they have these exceptions. So the local companies, when they try to sell to Kenmar, are not competitive. So one of the objectives with this industrial park that we will be creating in Nampula, in MoMA, for the heavy sand project, is actually to make sure that the SMEs, the local companies, can also compete under the same circumstance, where they will also be granted special benefits when they sell to the anchor project. So these are some of the actions that we have been doing. One of the most important also to mention is training. It's very important to train the local companies. You know, the big projects have no time to lose. It's very intense investment, so they should know quality. It's not negotiable. Things have to be done in a proper way, in the time that is required. So there are a lot of actions to make sure that we get our SMEs that are more than 98% of the total companies in Mozambique. So they really deserve a special attention in a way that they can become competitive and get these benefits. Thank you.
Okay. Following up on that, Frederick Chanza has asked about the infrastructure. What was the, was it funded by the government, and what infrastructure was funded by the private sector, and how did you finance it? Could you elaborate a little bit more on how who paid what for your infrastructure?
Thank you. There are two things very important to consider when we talk about industrial parks. The first thing, it's of course the benefits, the fiscal benefits, all the exemptions that can be granted by the government. But the second thing is the level of infrastructure that you have so that you can accommodate any type of industries. So in terms of infrastructures, for the question you just did now, as Beluluane Industrial Park, we are responsible to make sure that within these 700 hectares of land that I said we were granted by the government, we have to make sure that we do all the water supply, power supply, we build the roads, the fencing, security, IPC, communication technologies, and all these infrastructures, it's our responsibility. What do we do? Of course, to supply these infrastructures until until Beluluane Industrial Park, it's government. For example, electricity. Government should invest on power until some way within the park, and then the distribution, it's our responsibility. However, sometimes we don't get a response on time. So what we do, we support also the government to get funds from donors. And one of the actions we did in the last 5 years was to get funds from KfW, it was around 16 million euros, so that we could develop enough power for the park. Because in terms of power, there are 3 elements that are very important for industrial development. The first element is the quality of power. In industrial sector, you cannot operate with non-reliable power. Some production process cannot be interrupted. If you have fluctuation of power, then becomes huge headache and you lose a lot of money with the production process. The second component, in terms of, apart from the quantity, is the quality of this power. And the third component is the price. So as of now, what I could say is that we have been able to coordinate with the government of Mozambique so that we could have these funds from the German government of 16 million euros for the power supply. All the distribution, it's our responsibility. That will happen with water, that will happen with the roads. The government will have to build or has built roads until somewhere, and then all the distribution within the park, it's our responsibility. So these are 2 components that I would like to share in terms of what makes the industrial park more attractive for the investors, benefits, and the level of infrastructures.
Excellent. I think this next question is for Mr. Benis. It's asking about the impact of AEZO on SMEs, especially in the informal economies. Is there any program to target them to help support them?
It's not, thank you, Emily. It's not an easy question to answer, but let's look at it from the side that the SEZ is responsible to connect its development with the local economy and should bring an added value to the local growth and to industrial diversifications and serve the needs of the different profile of investors and different profiles of, let's say, economies operators. Addressing the needs of the SMEs is one of the responsibility of the SEZs for sure. And this has to go with the development of dedicated ecosystem where you could find some locomotive companies that will drive the business, that will support the attractiveness of the country, the attractiveness of the economic zones, that will support also the setup of new activity sectors. And let's say the efforts that we're gonna spend on supporting the locomotive would be with a great benefit to the smallest size company, I mean to the SMEs, that would be subcontracting and that would be supporting also the value chain of the locomotive business. So our responsibility is to drive this policy reform and fit to the different profile of investors, to the needs of the different profile of investors, including the SMEs, and also incorporate all this informal business that exists in our countries, and of course the presence of such predominancy of informal economy within the continent is I would say one of the main challenges that we should address. And the CFTA, the Continental Free Trade Agreement, will come up definitely with some insights and some let's say new regulations that would also help the informal economy to be part of the development of the whole continent.
Okay, thank you. This next question, I think, is for Ms. Ezekiel. Friedrich Tranza is asking, what taxes do zones pay in Mozambique? Can you give us a rough sense of percentage or income coming from zones?
Yes, the taxes mean like the benefits, like fiscal benefits that the special.
To the government, yeah.
We have for industrial zones, for all the customers' duties and VAT, they are exempted on special economic zone industrial zones. And then we have the corporate tax, which when you talk about industrial zones, they are 10 years free of corporate tax. And for special economic zones, this goes from 3 years free for the normal companies and 5 years for the operator. And for industrial zones, we have the operator too, which is also for the operator 10 years free. And then we have on labor, we have for the foreign laborers the quota of 15%. So in general, around these fiscal benefits that we are offering. Thank you.
Right. I guess I will maybe ask Greg, if Mr. Baker, maybe this would be a good question to put to you. How are zones mainstreaming gender? From your perspective on the board of BIP, do you see any trends?
I mean, as a park, of course, in terms of gender, it's each company has some autonomy. I mean, has full autonomy from a formal point of view. So we cannot oblige them. So what we can do, of course, is a lot of awareness raising. But another thing on gender, which Mr. Honorio Manuel talked about, which is our internship program. There we are making a strong effort to attract also women engineers, women technical workers into the internship program. And I think that is absolutely fundamental. And so far, we've been actually quite successful to do that. That's sort of the main point I see. Maybe I can make, not related to the question, but make another point, a little bit also linked to what Mr. Ahmed Beni said in the beginning, the role of industrial zones as catalyst for general industrialization. The internship program is also a very good example. So we started this internship program with support from the UK government, and we learned how to do that, to provide this service, and companies are very happy because when they apply, when they advertise for a job, they get hundreds and hundreds of CVs. They don't have the time to do that. So we do all the work to go through the CVs and give them 3, 4, 5 choices for a job, and they can choose. So we've become very successful inside the park. But now we have over 80 in the park. As you know, we have 40 companies that are operating. Now, in the internship program, we are serving more than 80 companies. So many companies outside the park. You have Coca-Cola, you have many other ones. They want to benefit from this service. So now over 80 companies, and more interest is coming up outside the park as well. So we can provide that service. So it's really a sort of a catalyst of skill development. It started because of the park. We could learn experience inside the park, and now we can use that same experience outside as well. So this is just sort of an example of the catalyst effect of a park. They're similar. There was another question about that I saw in the chat question with regard to Mozal and whether most in the park is also linked to the aluminum sector or not. And actually, as we said in the beginning, it's Beluluane Industrial Park is a multi-sectoral park, but it did start with Mozal. Very clear, the first companies were engineering companies, maintenance companies, all these companies providing services to Mozal. So that again created the nucleus. And now we have very multi-sectoral. For example, the largest employer in the park, actually, it's an Indian company. They have over 2,000 workers. What do? They produce artificial hair and export to South Africa, to Zambia, to all over the place. So 2,000 workers for artificial hair. It has nothing to do with the aluminum industry, but they're there because the conditions are good in the park, whether that's from the infrastructure point of view, from the fiscal benefits, so they join. We have cement companies, we have even a cashew processing plant, we have a steel pipe factory, we have many different things, and many more are coming in now. So again, a special economic zone or industrial park as a catalyst or an anchor investor serves as a catalyst for the multi-sectoral part, just for the agglomeration effects, the clustering effects.
This is a question, next question I have here would be good for Mr. Komiche, I think. It's someone, Mr. Lucy, who is asking about the relationship between zones and the possibility of bringing peace to a war-torn country. Do you have any experience in Mozambique itself was a war-torn in the past, as an example, but kind of a broader perspective from Unido about the link between zones and the possibility of helping heal a country?
Thank you, Emily. This is a challenging question, but very interesting. I mean, Unido, as mentioned in previous occasions, I remember in the African Industrialization Day 2016 that both a message from the Secretary General and the Unido General Director highlighted the fact that one industrial job can create another 2 to 5 jobs in other sectors, direct jobs. And I know the example of Beluluane Industrial Park and Mozal that the ratio is even greater than the one that was mentioned by the UN. So the fact that you have industries operating and generating, because there is a lot being said about entrepreneurship, self-employment. This is not sustainable and is very challenging. It can always slide back, and people can go back to square one overnight. While in industries, you have a long-term stability, job stability through decent job conditions, and very appealing to the youngsters. And I'm quite sure there is no evidence, probably we have to discuss that, but I'm quite sure that massive employment of youth that otherwise would be delinquent or doing very regular occupations can be a factor for peace consolidation. And looking at Cabo Delgado situation, where the insurgency and insecurity is driven by people at working age that have nothing else to do. They have nothing to lose because they have no job, no education, no opportunities. For sure, and when we discuss the drivers of conflict, we always stumble across the lack of opportunities and employment. I'm quite sure that there is a link, there is a correlation between more industrialization and less conflict. So definitely there is something to say about that.
Great, thank you. A very interesting question from Hans Hirschenroder. He's asking about conditions for local companies to create joint ventures with foreign companies. I guess this would be a good question both to AEZO in general, but also to the BIP, I guess Mr. Manuel. Would you like to answer that? First, let's go to Mr. Benis to answer what are some suggestions for facilitating joint ventures in general, and then to Mr. Manuel. Is Mr. Benis still there?
From the African point of view, I think we are all involved in knowledge sharing, expertise sharing, and also transfer of expertise. The transfer of expertise would definitely lead to initiatives that would bring added value to local companies through JV, through subcontracting, through let's say training, capacity building, but definitely within the SEZ area, there is a lot of facilities and capabilities that are available for local companies to enter into more interactions with foreign companies. And if you look at all successful model across the continent, they were all successful thanks to this collaborative framework that has been designed in a way that local companies can interact with the foreign companies, rather through JV or through subcontracting and so on. But there is absolutely no condition, except in some countries where, let's say, it is mandatory to have a local shareholders in your in a company. But this is there are only a very few examples in the continent. It's mainly in Algeria and another country where it is mandatory to have a local partner. But otherwise, there is no conditions for local companies to enter into a business with a foreign one.
And in Mozambique, more particularly, Mr. Manuel, do you have, you're not in charge of overall country policy, but do you have any other non-obligatory conditions in the park that maybe facilitate joint ventures rather than mandate them?
Thank you very much. I think it's more, as of now, it's more facilitating than being mandatory. As I mentioned previously, in the local content proposal, which is a proposal actually has not been approved, that will be for settled sector, it will be mandatory. It defines currently, for example, for the oil and gas project and other big projects, that local companies should find a foreign company, and there should be at least 51% of the local company, okay, in such opportunities. Of course, whenever it's not possible to get from the local market, it can always be sourced from the outside. But this, I think, as Amit said, this is going to be the way forward, because local companies should get expertise from the foreign companies. So in our way to see the process is that it's important that local companies start looking for the foreign companies to do all this joint venture, so that they can balance the interest, they can have expertise. You know, you can have resources, natural resources, but you need capital to do all the investment. And if local companies don't have that, the only way is to do this joint venture and map the best of the opportunity.
Okay, great. We are at 11:26, which I believe is, sorry, Mr. Komiche wants to say one word on local content, I believe it is. And I'll give the floor to him quickly, but then I think we need to wrap up, although unfortunately there's so many wonderful questions pending. I'm happy to continue, but I think we need to stick to the time. Mr. Komiche, do you want to intervene very quickly?
Thank you, Emily. Very briefly. Now, the dilemma of mandatory local content joint ventures in Mozambique always stumbled across the capacity of the companies to do so in a competitive manner. The local SMEs, the local private sector, lacks the qualifications and technology and human capital, and definitely there is a lot to be done. This kind of instruction cannot be done in the void, otherwise it will jeopardize the whole business environment and investment attractiveness. But we should encourage joint ventures as ways for transfer of technology, transfer of knowledge, but in a sustainable manner. And we have tested this possibility through our subcontracting and partnership exchange program that was mentioned before. And we are willing to continue in the future if the parties are interested. Thank you.
And just one last question before we close to Mr. Miller around sustainability issues and advantages. Do you think that there is a possibility in the near future to get up to speed on sustainability relatively quickly? Or do you think it's going to be a longer term learning process for zones? And what might be the best way to help facilitate learning between zones in sustainability issues?
Thank you for that question. I think what we've already seen, and we've seen it today in the presentations before us, is that zones are already engaged on a number of sustainability areas. Sustainability is a big field, though, and we've heard in this conversation today, it's touched on environmental issues, it's touched on issues around local SMEs, job creation, gender equality. So it's a broad area, so that it's not one of those things where you can ever tick the box and say, we've done that. It is a journey that people are going to be progressing on over time, and it's going to be an integral part of the business of these kind of parks basically forever. This is a mainstream function of these parks, is to focus on these things going forward. That said, as companies are integrating them, how can they improve that? Sharing of best practices is a key thing. Don't reinvent the wheel. Learn from your partners. UNCTAD and the ILO, we've done work with AEZs in the past and with special economic zones to try to facilitate the sharing of experiences. Unido does a lot of work in this area. And the World Free Zone Association, the AEZO, there are a lot of the zone associations that are now focused on sustainability as well, helping zones to deliver this kind of service to their investors and their community.
Thank you so much, and thank you to all of our speakers. Clearly, you've stimulated so much thought and interest. I would love to go through all the questions we received, but there's just no time. I would encourage you to follow up directly with each other. It's very easy to find out each other's contact information. Maybe AEZO can make that available on the website where it posts the PowerPoints to also be able to follow up directly on some key questions that are still pending. But I would just like to bring this session to a close. Again, thanking you all, both the participants who are speakers and the participants who are very actively engaged as listeners and sharing their own perspectives. And with that, I thank you and wish you all a great day.
Thank you, Emily.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Emily, for this outstanding moderation. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yes, and thank you for the great work. I mean, I myself have 100 questions for you, Mr. Benis, and for the other speakers, and I really hope we can keep exchanging.
Then let's meet in the next session, the next workshop that will take place in June.
Lovely. I'm looking forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
And thank you also to the team from AEZO, the ones who didn't show their face, but did a lot of work. It was wonderful.
Turn on your cameras. Turn on your cameras and wave. Don't be shy.
All right.
We are shy.
Yeah.
I'm here.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.
All right.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you again.
Thank you. Bye-bye.